Climate change is here. It's no longer an abstract idea. It's happening around us.
We don't have the government's action that we need to have.
This is about recognising the scale and urgency of the crises.
People have to jump through hoops to show that they are deserving of food and a roof over their head.
People are desperate for something that offers them some hope.
We're really at the turning point of it's now or never.
In the months leading up to the 2024 general election, the Green Party prepared for their most ambitious campaign so far. They had already gained several hundred council seats, and in Scotland, Greens had experienced 2.5 years in government with the SNP. In Parliament, however, they only had one MP, and under the first-past-the-post system, the two main parties had a distinct advantage. But the Greens were determined to get more MPs. For them, it was more than a political contest. The effects of the climate emergency were already being felt around the planet, and the other parties in the UK weren't making it a priority. Since the Green Party is relatively small and relies largely on donations from ordinary people, there wasn't going to be millions of pounds for major campaigns in all 650 seats. Instead, the party decided to concentrate on a handful of constituencies: Bristol Central, Waveney Valley, North Herefordshire and Brighton Pavilion. Ellie Chowns is a Green councillor in Herefordshire and a former MEP. She's a specialist in international development and is the Green candidate for North Herefordshire.
Just shortly after I joined, there was a call out for candidates, and I thought, oh, there'll be loads of candidates. But I said, yeah, I'm willing to stand if you need people. And actually, then I think we only stood 7 candidates that election. So they said, yes, do stand. Politics gives you this license to knock on people's doors and have conversations with people that you wouldn't otherwise meet. And you find so much in common, and it's such a positive experience overall. And so I just loved that. So that was the first time I stood for election, and I just carried on, basically.
Bristol Central is a new constituency covering much of the city that was previously Bristol West. Carla Denyer, Bristol councillor and co-leader of the Green Party, was chosen to stand here.
When I joined the Green Party in 2011, I had no intention of being a politician at all. And it was around 3 years later, 1 or 2 people approached me and asked me if I'd consider standing for one of the local council seats that we thought we might be able to win this time around. And I said no, and said no again and again, and I can't remember exactly, but I think I must have said no at least half a dozen times before I said yes. And in retrospect, I'm really grateful to the people that didn't take no for an answer.
Meanwhile, in Cardiff, Anthony Slaughter is at a planning meeting for the local campaign. Anthony is the leader of the Wales Green Party, but his patch isn't one of the targets at this election.
Bristol is so winnable. It is, you can feel it when you go there. And the redrawing of the boundaries has made the position even stronger, and they're running such a strong campaign. Carla came a very strong second last time. It is so doable and very, very exciting that we will have a Green MP just across the Severn Bridge.
Waveney Valley is another new constituency following recent boundary changes. Standing here is Adrian Ramsay, the other co-leader of the Green Party. In 2003, he became one of the country's youngest councillors.
I can remember learning about environmental issues, watching programmes like Newsround and Blue Peter. I remember pestering my parents on simple things like recycling and using low-energy light bulbs.
Adrian also helped run the campaign that got Caroline Lucas elected in Brighton Pavilion. In 2010, Caroline Lucas became the Green Party's first MP. In the following years, they won in hundreds of council elections, but struggled to get more Greens into Parliament. In Brighton, however, Caroline's majority increased every time. Then, in June 2023, she announced her intention to step down, leaving the party with the unenviable task of replacing her. Could they find someone with the commitment and experience? And if the people of Brighton didn't take to someone new, would they lose the only Green voice in Parliament? There was a distinct possibility that instead of having 4 seats in Parliament, the Green Party could end up with none at all. Siân Berry was chosen as candidate. Siân is a former co-leader of the party and a Green member in the London Assembly.
I genuinely can't believe that now I'm nearly 50 and we are still in a position of having climate denial as being reasonably mainstream. It pops up on the mainstream media. Like a lot of politicians say, at one point you realise you need to do something because someone needs to sort it out, and if it's not you, then it might not happen.
As the general election neared, Green candidates were selected in almost every constituency. But these few people, 4 for 24, were the Greens' best hopes for Parliament. The Green candidate for Bristol Central is Carla Denyer. In 2022, she and Tom Hathaway both won council seats in the Clifton Down ward, and Tom thinks she has a very good chance of becoming an MP.
She's calm and focused and always got a clear answer to whatever the topic is. She is fantastic at talking eloquently, clearly, and in a way that really draws you into what she's saying.
Deputy Leader Zach Polanski sees Carla's engineering background as both the reason she's standing for the Green Party and what makes her especially well qualified to be an MP.
She's a renewables engineer, and she's worked for a long time to decarbonise away from fossil fuels and make sure that energy is essentially clean and green. Through that work, she has realised time and time again that the barriers to renewable energy are not financial and they're not technical, they are political.
She's a complete dynamo. She's, really, really energetic, amazing attention to detail, super professional.
I could be earning a lot more than I am now if I'd stayed in the engineering sector. My main motivation was making the country and the world a better place, and so I gave up my career in the engineering sector, even though that meant at the time about a 1/3 pay cut, because I really felt like I was only changing the world one wind farm at a time, and things needed to change much faster than that. Adrian joined when he was a teenager, helped get lots of councillors elected in Norwich back in the day, and since then has been the CEO of a couple of climate charities.
He's been in the party over half of its existence, that's 25 years.
He's the co-leader of the Green Party, which gives him that kind of standing and press opportunities and presence that we wouldn't otherwise have.
We would guarantee an NHS dentist for everyone. We would make personal social care free at the point of use.
When he talks to people, kind of his knowledge of policy, of green policies really comes through, and he has that really good way of engaging with voters on the doorstep.
He's a really thoughtful guy, a really measured guy.
He also works in renewables and has been involved in alternative technologies.
The other party's determined to turn off the tap to investment. I particularly remember geography lessons at school where we learnt about climate change, deforestation, and also being very conscious of how so much of the world is just in real poverty, and sitting there thinking to myself that these are huge issues which are going to have a big impact on me and my generation if we don't address them. I'm not dependent on this election for my career. Would my life be simpler and more straightforward and more family friendly if I carried on in the charity world? Yes, it definitely would. I'm not doing this for a career. I'm doing it because we desperately need that political change. Thinking about what life will be like for my children and for everybody else's children and grandchildren, it brings into sharp focus the lifelong concern I've had from long before I was a parent about climate breakdown. And climate change is here. It's no longer an abstract idea. It's happening around us.
One of Adrian's achievements was being a leading member of the team that first got Caroline Lucas elected to Westminster in 2010.
Please, can I ask you that if there's an extra hour you can give, an extra half...
In Brighton, Caroline Lucas is preparing to give up being the Green Party's only MP, while Siân Berry settles into her new role.
Their service is so underfunded. The whole of the city is crying out.
We've got Siân Berry, of course, who's standing in Brighton Pavilion. Like me, has a science and engineering background. Siân is a predecessor of mine as the leader of the National Party and, of course, a London Assembly member, and has been a mayoral candidate a few times in London.
She's a super experienced politician in her own right. She's fantastically kind of warm and outgoing, and she really, really knows her stuff, really passionate about issues like housing, for example.
I've worked every single day for the last few years with Siân Berry at the London Assembly, and I know how hard she works. I know how hard and seriously she takes policy. When she stands up in Prime Minister's Questions Time, she is someone who will not take no for an answer. She's also really good at building relationships with other people in other parties. I think Siân will bring her sense of cooperation and collaboration, actually, building alliances to essentially get what we need to be done.
I really enjoy looking at the reasons for policy, the evidence behind policies. If I want to persuade someone to do something, I will come at them with a whole load of evidence, and usually that's evidence of how it will save money in the end or the harm it will prevent. Most politicians rely on their preferences or their opinions for what things ought to be done, and that comes out of being a scientist.
Siân grew up in the 1970s and 80s. Her parents both teachers, and life under Margaret Thatcher influenced her political direction.
They didn't get pay rises, there were shortages of materials in schools, the buildings were all terrible and falling down. So I did grow up thinking that the Conservatives were bad. that was a very broad thing that I was very aware of. I was also, out in the news, I was aware of the miners' strike. I was aware of the rise of really predatory capitalism. So I could see that there was growing inequality and this wasn't fair. But I wasn't political. I just had, I think, probably quite a correct analysis of what was wrong with the world. And that includes, from my science side, what was going wrong with climate change as well.
The candidate for North Herefordshire, Ellie Chowns, was a Green MEP before Britain left the EU. Deputy leader Zach Polanski thinks her experience of working with other parties there would help in the UK Parliament.
The House of Commons is very oppositional. It's two parties often just shouting at each other. And people who have worked under a proportional system, like Ellie, know the value of working with people with other parties, building bridges, using diplomacy, and making sure that compromise isn't a dirty word. She's a force of nature when she walks into a room. She's got that big smile, that big personality, and I think that's something people can get behind.
I joined basically because I couldn't bear the way that politics was going, and I just thought I can't sit back any longer and not get involved. I wanted to get involved and do something practical. And I thought really carefully about which party to join, and I kind of went and read manifestos, and I came along to a Green Party meeting, actually in Hereford one evening, and I was really impressed with the people there. They were planning for the local elections in May, and they were really energetic and organised, and some great people there, and I thought, yes, I want to be part of this. So I hadn't got involved because, I wanted to be a politician. I just thought, let me pay my subs, let me deliver some leaflets, do something useful. And but I put myself forward as a candidate and stood in this election and started going out and knocking on people's doors and talking to people.
Ellie was aware of climate change as a teenager and thinks Britain's industrial past means we should be doing more to tackle its problems.
It's not a fringe issue, And yet, we don't have the government's action that we need to have. You know, we literally in this country have a government that says, oh, you know, we're doing fine. We can kind of, let's keep our general targets, but we'll get rid of any of the actions that we were going to take towards it. And that's a utter double think.
Ellie's taken unpaid leave from her university job to do her bit.
I'm completely imperfect. I really believe in what I'm doing in terms of being involved in politics, that it can make things better. And I think, quite realistic about my being a candidate is a drop in an ocean of, you know, trying to kind of build that green wave. And everybody that I'm speaking to, asking them to vote for me, effectively I'm asking them to be a drop in an ocean that helps to build that green wave. We're trying to get politics to shift, to take the climate crisis seriously. We're trying to build a much more equal world. We're trying to change the way that politics is done. All of those are really kind of big, hairy, audacious goals. And the way that you do it is very modest. It's delivering leaflets, reaching out, conversation.
In the same way each candidate has their personal motives for standing, there are quite different reasons for choosing each constituency, and different reasons why the Greens think they're winnable. Bristol Central has an electorate of around 70,000 people. It contains several departments of Bristol University and several hospitals. The main opposition comes from Labour's Thangam Debonair. Notable landmarks are the thriving cultural centre of the Harbourside area and the Clifton Suspension Bridge, designed by Isambard Kingdom Brunel.
Well, I'm standing in Bristol Central because it's where I live. I've lived here for about 14 years now. It's also where I've been a councillor since 2015. Although I'm not from here originally, I really fell in love with it. One of the reasons I fell in love with it is that Bristol has a really great history of doing things a bit differently. A lot of progressive and radical movements started in Bristol or the southwest. And I think the voters of Bristol have an appetite for a politician who's going to get elected and shake things up from the inside. In my ward, even though it is in many ways quite a privileged area, one of the areas where there is a little bit of deprivation is in housing. There's a lot of renters in my ward, and because it's a very overheated housing market, unfortunately there are some rogue landlords who leave their properties in a terrible state, and often young first-time renters at university, they don't know what their rights are, and so they don't know that they can complain. It is very satisfying when we're able to make contact with those residents and help them substantially improve their living situation and stand up for their own rights.
Waveney Valley is one of the rural constituencies. It's on the Suffolk-Norfolk border, about 90 minutes from London by train, and would take around 50 minutes to drive across, but has only 2 railway stations. The largest town is Diss, with a population around 9,500. The main opposition comes from Conservative Richard Rout.
It is a huge constituency and it's very rural. So there are only 2 places within the constituency that has a train station, which makes the kind of logistics of running a campaign here really quite hard. So it's beautiful, beautiful countryside. And what we're finding as well is that people here are very attached to their land, to their environment. They care a lot about it, and people are really angry at the kind of mismanagement, the river pollution, the air pollution, the building on precious land. It's all something that people here care about.
People just can't register for an NHS dentist. 1 in 4 are going without treatment. Some people have even resorted to pulling out their own teeth, or to having to drive 200 miles to an NHS dentist, or to paying money that they can't really afford for private dentistry. And so I've been really taking this issue up as one of the biggest issues locally, highlighting the root cause of the problem, which is that the government's dental contracts don't reflect the cost that dentists incur in doing charges. A dentist will be paid the same by the NHS for giving someone 6 fillings as they would for giving them 1. That's a practical, tangible thing that I'll take up to challenge the government on if I'm elected. We need the government to stand by its promises on things like preserving local banks and introducing banking hubs. These are things where I already stand up for people in this area, in an area where it's been MPs from just one party for as long as people can remember. But this time around, people have got an opportunity for a change.
When Adrian joined, the party in Norfolk wasn't actively campaigning, so he took on a leading role. Back then, you had to be 21 to stand for the council.
I was not old enough to stand. I was the election agent, and we got councillors elected, and then the year later I was old enough to join them. And from there, the Green Party in Norwich and across Norfolk has grown significantly, and that's of course gone to a whole new level in terms of our strength in Norfolk and Suffolk in recent years.
Later, he led the second largest party on Norwich City Council, and in May 2024, Greens made history in Suffolk, taking control of the council for the first time. It had previously been a minority Tory administration.
The Waveney Valley, it's a completely new constituency, but it's made out of parts that have been Conservative for decades. The Conservatives haven't really faced any opposition for a generation at least.
Labour and the Liberal Democrats are weak, Labour in particular are not strong in rural East Anglia, and they're focusing on other seats. They're not campaigning here.
Brighton Pavilion is on the southeast coast, an hour on the train from London. It encompasses what remains of the West Pier and the Royal Pavilion, former residence of Prince George, crowned Prince Regent in 1811. It also contains the University of Sussex and the University of Brighton. The main opposition comes from Labour's Tom Gray, a Mercury Prize-winning musician.
There are a whole range of people living in Brighton Pavilion and a big range of different areas as well. You've got the places near the seafront, which are, they've got tourism going on there, they've got a lot of nightlife. You've got the areas of the city that were built in Regency times. So they're beautiful houses, don't get me wrong, but they are old and quite a lot of them are damp, and there's a lot of private renters and bad landlords in that area, as well as just gorgeous homes. And then you've got the areas that are more where the families live, the bigger Victorian houses, the areas that go up around the railways and the estates out towards the Big A Road. Those estates are getting on a bit now as well. They built around the same time I was, basically. So they're getting on a bit now. And when I knock on those doors, I find a lot of people, they live in council homes or housing association homes. They have repair issues. They've got problems with damp and mould. Those homes need insulating. So there's different issues that get brought up in different parts of the city.
Understanding the constituency is one thing. The more formidable task facing Siân will be keeping the voters that Caroline won in the previous elections.
We've got these 2 seats, Bristol and Brighton, that are younger demographics, more sort of left-wing facing communities, and then 2 more rural, more traditionally Conservative facing communities. And what I think that shows is that actually the Green Party has something to offer everybody. We are not a kind of one-trick pony at all. Brighton Pavilion, obviously, we're going to be fighting to keep that because that's the one where we've had an MP, a brilliant MP in Caroline, for so long.
A majority of people have voted Green before, several times. So all of it's an absolute joy to knock on. I've been a local councillor. I've been elected local councillor several times, and come first in the ward. But even there, we didn't get above 50% of the vote. Caroline had more than 50% of the vote last time. So I'm knocking on doors where more than half of the voters voted Green last time. And that is quite the privilege. And it's really, really nice.
People here, they get the big issues, they understand climate change, they understand why the NHS isn't performing. They understand why there's a cost of living crisis. They worry about inequality. Siân is an incredible hard worker. She is tenacious, she will work, and as we get that across to people and show people who Siân is, and originally when Caroline announced that she would stand down, and people said, oh, I don't know who Siân is, and now we're seeing more and more people saying, I like what I've seen so far, so we'll keep at it.
Brighton Pavilion's been our only seat for quite some time now. So me holding this seat is absolutely imperative. You can't even think about not winning here. We have to win.
North Herefordshire is a largely rural constituency that would take an hour to cross by car. It contains several small towns, including Leominster and Ledbury. The main opposition comes from Conservative Bill Wiggins, who has been MP for Leominster since 2010. The three main planks of Ellie's campaign for North Herefordshire are renewing the economy, repairing public services and restoring local rivers.
The rivers issue is something that people are very passionate about here in North Herefordshire. We're recording this in Leominster. The River Lug goes through the town. It's been terribly polluted, largely through agricultural runoff, and particularly because of industrial poultry unit. And our MP has done nothing about it. So, working on that is going to be an absolute top priority for me. Our health service is underfunded and understaffed. We've got a much older demographic than the national average here. Health services are really important to people, and working within the council, I've seen the devastating effect of the cuts to public services that we've seen since 2010. We spend so much of it, the vast majority of it, on the emergency care, that kind of ambulances at the bottom of the cliff. What about the preventive investment that stops people getting ill in the first place, that helps people stay healthy? We've got a very old housing stock in Herefordshire, lots of beautiful historic buildings, and quite a lot of new building as well. What we should be doing is helping people to insulate their homes so that the money they spend on fuel stays within the home. Those investments create great jobs. They help keep people warm with low bills, and by the way, they're good for the planet as well.
Head of Elections Chris Williams thinks Ellie would be ideal as an MP for North Herefordshire.
Incredibly personable. She's been on a very big tour of all the village halls in North Herefordshire and in the market towns, a huge rural constituency. When people get into a room with Ellie, they are converted. People come to those village hall tours, interested, curious, and they leave saying, let me help you, give me some leaflets. These are big rural constituencies. We know we can win them. We're managing it, but we do need help.
In North Herefordshire, we've grown and grown and grown over the last 10 years. What has often been thought of as a very traditionally Conservative area, and certainly at general elections it's voted that way, pretty much since the year dot. But what we find is that when we campaign locally, and that is absolutely our strength, that really, really shifts. And in my ward, where I stood, back in 2011, before I stood there, it voted 80% Conservative. And then by 2019, the second time I stood, it had shifted to 80% Green. And these days, there's so much disillusion in North Herefordshire among people who have traditionally voted Conservative. And they're really, really pleased to feel that there's this viable, strong, vibrant, exciting Green campaign. It's actually a very energising process, campaigning in a place like this, and feel really hopeful about it.
In Bristol, Anthony Slaughter is spending another day knocking doors to help Carla's campaign.
You always need more people. You can't knock on enough doors. You can't have enough conversations. And also, you mustn't be complacent. Complacency is how you lose.
Bristol Central is winnable for a myriad of reasons. It's a new constituency. The Labour majority that the previous seat of Bristol West had is cut in half because of the new boundary changes. So we've got a smaller greener area to cover.
In 2019, Labour won all 4 Bristol seats in the general election. On the doorstep, Labour's narrative is often, vote for us to keep the Tories out. But in Bristol West, the Tories came a poor third. And since the local elections of May 2024, the Greens considerably outnumber Labour on Bristol Council. Furthermore, within the newly created boundaries of Bristol Central, there are only Green wards, making that line difficult to justify.
We now have a very Green-leaning constituency with exclusively Green councillors. And again, we have a very educated electorate. They understand what the Keir Starmer Labour Party is standing for. They understand what Carla Denyer is standing for.
And we've got a fantastic candidate in Carla, who also has now significantly more national coverage because she is the leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. We're also, as a local party, the most organised we have ever been.
You know, people have got a lot going on in their lives. They often don't follow local politics very closely. So a lot of people we speak to on the doorstep are not aware of how strong the Greens already are in this area. In fact, I've got this stack of paperwork in front of me because we're going to go outdoor knocking straight after this interview. A lot of the people that live in Bristol Central now weren't even here in the last general election, or some of them weren't old enough to vote. So they don't know the political history in this area, and being able to show them that it's between Greens and Labour and that there's no possibility of the Conservatives being elected here really changes people's outlook, we find.
So the challenge, of course, is making sure that we can get all of that across, contact enough people, have face-to-face conversations with enough people, and get people's attention. If we get people's attention for a couple of minutes, we can potentially see a quite sizable swing this time around.
With candidates selected, campaign teams organised and volunteers signed up, the candidates are out on the doorstep speaking to ordinary members of the public.
We argued from the beginning that the alternatives.
Wales leader Anthony Slaughter is spending another day knocking doors for Carla and Bristol Central. And in Waveney Valley...
So the campaign is going really well. We're getting a lot of good responses on the doorstep. Lots of people prepared to vote Green, lots of interest, lots of hope. The fact that they have the chance to vote something other than Conservative is great. Our volunteers are out delivering leaflets, all the time. And what we're hearing on the doorstep as well is that people are really angry at the kind of mismanagement of their natural assets.
Is that all right? Great. We're getting a fantastic response on the doorstep. There's so many people looking for a change this time round, particularly the huge numbers of people who might have voted Conservative in the past. People can see that the Green Party is the active challenger in this constituency. It's a brand new constituency, so there is going to be a new MP. There's no incumbent.
People are desperate for something to change at the moment. They're really conscious of the fact that there's a worldwide crisis of climate chaos, things that are creating refugees around the world.
There's so much disillusion in North Herefordshire among people who have traditionally voted Conservative. You knock on doors and people say, well, I've been a lifelong Conservative, but I can't vote for that pack anymore.
People in North Herefordshire had never had their door knocked before by anybody. And so for that to happen first from the Green Party and for us to have that positive message was incredible.
They're disappointed by the direction Starmer is taking the Labour Party in, and so they are considering, or many of them have already decided, to vote Green because they know that they can trust us to stick with our values. Caroline Lucas, as just one MP, has had a huge impact on British politics. Imagine what we could achieve with a few more.
While activists and candidates are largely getting a warm reception from voters, there is no time for the campaign teams to rest on their laurels.
We just did not have enough people all the way through the long campaign doing that door knocking. So various low points of just action days with just 10 people at them, or when we'd been hoping for 50 really, just feeling like I was banging my head against a brick wall of just how do I get people to come. Getting that information out to the rest of the membership so that people realise that it was worth coming to North Herefordshire, that this was a long campaign worth getting involved in, was very, very difficult.
There were points earlier on, including in the winter, where I was balancing working in my day job. I was still doing a half-time job leading a charity alongside being co-leader of the party as a job share with Carla, being the candidate locally, and with family responsibilities, and there were points where that was very, very challenging.
Around March, something really terrible happened, which was really frightening for the campaign. We lost access to a lot of our data, our canvassing data. I think there was just a glitch in the canvassing software, so we didn't know whether we'd lost data or whether we just didn't have access to it until it was fixed. I think it was a couple of weeks. That was a bit nerve-wracking.
From the beginning we were getting such positive door-knocking data, and it showed that we could win. And I particularly remember in October 22 Green Party conference, me sharing that information at an event and just it energising everybody in the room. Like, oh my gosh, we can win.
There were certainly weeks where it just felt like everything that could possibly go wrong was going wrong. People were tired. People were still hopeful that things could go right, but it's pretty grueling. And there were just moments where leaflets were coming through doors that weren't necessarily true from other parties, or opposition opponents were saying things about us that just weren't true.
We knew the Conservatives would play dirty, and we were always wondering what would be done. We knew that they would be using the fact that Ellie was arrested in Trafalgar Square, once standing up for people's right to protest when she was an MEP, and that they would just cast that in some horrible light.
There were some pretty awful headlines that were made up about the party. One I remember is in The Spectator saying the Green Party are terrifying.
It didn't cut through. I think that Conservative brand had become so devalued. Even just again and again and again on the doorstep we were hearing from people saying they'd voted Conservative their whole lives but never again.
One of the main difficulties of running the Green campaign is the lack of money. While Conservatives, Labour and Reform UK have the backing of millionaires and unions, the Green Party is largely financed by ordinary members and supporters. Getting volunteers to knock doors and deliver leaflets is one thing. Paying for those leaflets and a campaign office requires hard cash.
If we had the money the big parties have, you'd have a Green government in Westminster. We don't have the multimillionaires bankrolling us like the larger parties do, but that also means that we're not working for anyone else, we are standing up for ourselves.
We make tremendous use of the resources that we do have, but the fact is, we're never going to be the party that takes big corporate donations from the mainstream of capitalism. We won't take money from big oil companies, from airlines, from banks that are exploiting resources around the world. From companies that are supporting regimes around the world that are damaging human rights.
Fortunately, the appeals and crowdfunders pay off. Hundreds of members and supporters send in small amounts, and eventually there is enough to fund the 4 target campaigns. Another difficulty is getting attention in the media. While journalists might attend Green press events, the party won't get the massive airtime received by Labour and the Tories. In spring 2024, the target campaigns were well underway, and with political commentators predicting a general election in October or even later, there seemed to be plenty of time to reach every voter. Then Rishi Sunak surprised many, including his own MPs, by announcing the election would take place much sooner, on the 4th of July.
Those final 6 weeks we knew were critical, so we had to have so much ready. Even on that first night in Bristol, for example, we'd got a leaflet out to every single door in the constituency within about 3 hours of Rishi Sunak standing in Downing Street with rain pouring on him. So much so that some people had come home from work and had found out about the general election starting and being called from us.
Campaign teams quickly switched to plans drawn up for such an occasion, the shorter campaign. They contacted everyone they could find, asking for help, and, energised by the approaching election, more and more supporters turned up to lend a hand.
The length of the campaign, I think, was the hardest thing, just to motivate yourself to work so hard when you don't know when the end point is going to be. So in a way, it worked really well for us that the election was called when it was, because then we found that little bit of energy that we had. But because we'd had, the local elections, we'd had 2 really hard by-elections as well. We'd used up a lot of that energy, and I think the prospect, if it'd gone on until Christmas, it would have been hard.
This election is unique.
Since the Greens are now standing in every constituency in England and Wales, the media have had to take the party more seriously. And they turn up in force at both the campaign launch in Bristol and the manifesto launch in Brighton. But there's a problem. A handful of the hundreds of Greens standing in the election have written tweets that are considered anti-Semitic. With the ongoing conflict in the Middle East and attacks against Jews in the UK on the increase, the press are understandably interested.
We are standing more candidates in England and Wales than the Conservatives. We're standing 574 Green candidates, a record number and an example of how we're more prepared for this election than ever before and more prepared than even the Conservatives. You'd have thought they'd have known there was going to be an election, wouldn't you? So across those 574 candidates, there have been 4 who were originally put forward who are now not standing. So like any other party, if issues are raised around a candidate, those are investigated. That process happens independently of the party leadership, as is a matter of good governance. And those 4 candidates have been replaced by other candidates. So we're now standing right across the country.
Adrian gives an immediate answer to the question. But Deputy Leader Zach Polanski knows he can respond from his own unique experience of the party. Zach, who is Jewish himself, gives interview after interview, hoping to show that all people are welcome in the Green Party.
The Times ran a front page headline with pictures of our candidates. Now look, I'm one of 5 Jewish people who have ever been political leaders or in leadership teams in British history. So anti-Semitism is something I take, even personally, very seriously, in the same way that I do Islamophobia, and there has to be absolutely zero tolerance.
As we became more and more likely to become successful, there were more attacks on us, more things where they were seeking out where we might be vulnerable. Carla and Adrian, who had to deal with all these interviews, just did a tremendous job of speaking honestly and acknowledging where there were issues, but also just being normal human beings about it.
One of our candidates was accused of attending a Palestinian solidarity march. I think we're really in a place that as a Jewish person I feel less safe if you're starting to label that as anti-Semitism, because I would be on that same Palestinian solidarity march.
There's this horrible conflict that's affecting so many civilians, and Zach has faced attacks. Zach has stuck to his beliefs and party policy. He's made a real case for action on things, whilst trying to make sure that we're listening to other Jewish members who might have some more concerns about how we're talking about things.
In the current media climate where we have Jewish organisations claiming to speak for the British Jewish community, consistently commenting on the Israeli government in a positive way, then I have felt the need to counter that. I don't speak for the entire Jewish community, but I do speak for myself, and I speak for many young Jewish people and older Jewish people who I've been walking and marching with and been organising at protests with, where these so-called mainstream organisations do not represent the diversity of views in the Jewish community.
In the last few days, the media is predicting a Labour landslide, with the Greens picking up only one additional seat.
We started getting these MRP polls that predicted it would be Labour or Conservative in Waveney Valley, and so obviously Labour and Conservatives both jumped on that and produced leaflets with those graphs on, and we did see a dip in our support on the doorstep, which was really worrying.
Well, the polls go up and down and vary, and it's something you have to take with a pinch of salt.
The MRP polls are notoriously unreliable at constituency level. At tiny samples, they don't even do polling in certain constituencies. They try and extrapolate from tiny samples to look at what might happen around the country.
They're so used to the Labour and Conservative duopoly, and so they look at those swings between those two parties and try and project that information onto the nation overall. But Greens don't fit into that picture, so they don't know what's happening in Green target constituencies.
I definitely did feel a lot of frustration at how Labour were claiming that they could win. They were using MRP polls that, national data really, that showed them coming second, that showed us coming last. And it being so obvious that MRP poll hadn't used data from anybody actually living in North Herefordshire.
The closer you get to polling day, the few things you can do about the result, right? So when you know that you have a year to win the election, it feels doable. When you only have 2-3 days, you know that most of the work will have had to be done already. So I was getting less and less confident while also knowing that we had the data on our side.
Until the polls close, however, Green campaigners know it's still possible to make a difference. So the volunteers keep coming. Keep on delivering leaflets. Keep on knocking doors, reminding supporters to vote. In Preston Park, Brighton, the main task is speaking to undecided voters. It's a delicate matter, so the cameras aren't allowed to intrude. In Bristol, there are thousands of letters to be sent, and each of these voters will get a letter addressed by hand. In North Herefordshire, Bob and Claire are delivering last-minute leaflets in a sparsely populated area. Keeping things going are a handful of dedicated people in campaign offices, writing leaflets, organising deliveries, checking information. One way the teams keep up morale, gathering together for a group photo. It's become a daily ritual of the campaign.
Well, in the final week or so before the result, we still had no idea if we'd won this or not. We knew that it was within reach, but it wasn't yet firmly in both hands. There were a lot of people undecided. So in that final week, we were all out knocking on doors every hour we had. And in particular, I was going to areas of the city that had the greatest number of people who were undecided and having what turned out to be really interesting and fruitful conversations with people who were hesitating because they thought that they might need to vote tactically, or perhaps they had complicated feelings about it because they'd always voted Labour in the past. Those conversations were really useful for me to understand where people were coming from, and it looks like it helped a lot of people make their minds up. But yeah, we were right up to the final day. We were not sure which way it was going to go.
Early on, you can kind of feedback and you're kind of getting a sense of what's going on. But in the last few days, it really is. You're like any other member in that moment. You just need to get on doors, get knocking on doors and get more votes. And so it was a frantic last week. It did feel really good. I kept checking in and worrying about complacency, both in myself and the rest of the membership. But in each of the constituencies that I went to, it was really clear that there was a really strong feeling that the central message that got through was that the Tories were toast, they were done, and no one needed to worry about them. But the Labour Party weren't offering real hope and real change, and that's what the Green Party were absolutely offering. We said it lots, and I think that's the message that really cut through.
Polling day was just crazy. We had over 500 people in North Herefordshire campaigning, so managing that many people over North Herefordshire, which is 40 miles by 40 miles, is quite a massive achievement.
The overall size of the party's campaign was just like nothing we've ever seen before. Everything was more professional. We had more candidates than ever before. We did a survey afterwards that they report that they felt more equipped than ever before.
The independent poll that the Green Party commissioned, that actually they were speaking to people in North Herefordshire. So they showed us coming second, some of them showed us coming first.
We had 4 people who were ready to step up. And so when they were already on the media and when people were meeting them, they were already behaving like MPs.
North Herefordshire was covered in 1,000 poster boards, 1,000 window posters. Everyone was talking about it, that real, everyone seeing that, oh my God, my neighbours are voting Green. Oh, okay, it's not a crazy thing after all.
The response we got from the media was larger and more enthusiastic than we've ever seen before. Not just about our target candidates, but across the board.
I never take elections for granted, and throughout the campaign I was unsure which way it was going to go, but by the night before the election and election day it was very clear that there was a really positive, buoyant atmosphere. People were voting Green positively, and it did feel like it was an election we were going to win.
At 10 o'clock on Thursday the 4th of July, the exit polls are still predicting just 2 seats for the Greens. There is nothing more anyone can do now to affect the outcome, and nothing for campaigners except a long night of waiting.
When the exit poll came out, it looked like we had just won 2 MPs. And I just had this moment of not knowing who that might be, but just sadness that 2 of our amazing candidates hadn't got over the line.
When the exit poll came out saying 2, I felt initially just frustrated and was just telling everybody, ignore it.
I think some of the predictions were even that the Greens were going to have 0 MPs.
Our doorstep feedback was so good on the day. It made everyone feel really, really hopeful. And so, yeah, waiting for the final result was full of anticipation.
At the various campaign headquarters, candidates and campaign teams watched the television anxiously.
And it just so happened that I ended up tallying on the desks for a selection of wards that were amongst our weakest. So I was left after the first hour thinking that it was going to be really close.
I was still very, very nervous, because no matter how well you think things are going, there are things you might not know that are going on in the background. And you know, we know that the other parties have bigger resources than us. Maybe there was an enormous online get out the vote operation for Labour we just didn't know about.
After all the work of the previous year, all the thought and planning, all the months of leafleting, door knocking, talking and listening to the people in their constituencies, will the night bring joy or bitter disappointment? Would the electorate punish them for the controversial messages of a few ex-candidates? Or will the positive experiences of people within the party be enough to satisfy critics? At campaign headquarters, Carla's team killed time until the results come in, knowing Adrian, Siân and Ellie would be doing the same. Have they done enough? Spoken to enough voters? Delivered enough information? Does the Green message appeal to the wider electorate as much as it does to their supporters? In the next few hours, they will find out. Finally, the moment of truth.
On election night, we had been up for, more than 24 hours.
I'd had very little sleep and was really tired. So there's the emotion of the tiredness and at the end of a very long campaign.
So by 1 a.m, I knew that we'd won, and it was just amazing. And we had to, all of us, just keep to a complete poker face. The BBC correspondent was saying, Helen, come on, you can tell me. And I was saying, I really can't. I've signed something saying I can't.
When I came into the Count Centre in Brighton and Hove, it was lovely. There were so many people there, all the councillors. And the first thing I wanted to do, though, apart from hugging Caroline and a few others, was go and see the piles of votes.
I was able to make that phone call to Ellie saying, I'm feeling really happy, as the sort of code.
Well, I turned up to the count late at night, a little bit after it had started, and I could tell from the faces of my campaign manager and members of my team and my volunteers that we'd won when I got in the building.
As soon as I walked through the door, I said to Chris Williams, our head of elections, do we know who the one is? And he said, 1. And I said, yeah. And he said, 4. And I was like, no. And he was like, 4.
And when that first result came, I could just feel that the size of the majority, the huge swing, just said to me, we can do it. We can do it in all 4 seats. So, yeah, it was just euphoric.
I went into the room and saw the piles of votes, and it was really, absolutely, it was just fantastic. But then also, we started to hear that the results were coming out soon for the other places. And the one I remember is Ellie, is hearing that Ellie had won.
In North Herefordshire, Ellie Chowns overturned Conservative domination of rural seats, gaining 43% of the vote. Similarly, in Waveney Valley, Adrian Ramsay won with a large majority. Siân Berry held on to Brighton Pavilion with an impressive 14,000 majority. And in Bristol Central, Carla Denyer won, and won big, with over 10,000 votes more than Labour.
One of the wonderful things was we kept getting news from the other constituencies. So we heard that Ellie had been elected, and then that Siân had been elected, and then we grew more and more confident that we would get Adrian in as well.
Winning a Green seat in rural, traditionally Conservative heartlands was a political earthquake, frankly. So I really did feel the moment.
Waveney Valley, today you have made history. You've shown that the Green Party appeals just as much in rural areas, in our market towns and villages, as it does in the cities. And you've sent a clear message to Westminster by electing the first Green MP in East Anglia.
This is an absolutely historic night. I mean, you know, what you have done here, what we have done here, this team and the broader team, absolutely extraordinary. And it is all your hard work, whether you've been delivering leaflets, whether you've been knocking on endless doors, whether you've been working late into the night, entering data, whether you've been taking photos, doing social media. It's just baking cake. I mean, I cannot, you know, begin all of the things that are needed to make a campaign like this successful. Answering emails. I hope you feel so proud of yourselves. And you know, give yourselves a round of applause.
How many people here for the first time actually you had a vote that did something?
This is not only the start of a new Green chapter for Waveney Valley, but also for Britain. And so I say to everyone who voted for me, everyone who supported my campaign in any way, thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Absolutely 10 out of 10, delighted with the result, with how everybody came together, with the phenomenal campaign that my team ran in the constituency, staff and volunteers, the national campaign, which was on a completely different level to where we've been in before. Scale and professionalism was absolutely superb.
I think just everything went our way. I guess that's it really, that's my takeaway. Everything that we aimed to do, we achieved.
The point at which I rationally knew and the point at which it really hit home were a bit different. It's funny, at Counts, the candidates don't get an office or anything, so we just had to sort of hide in a quiet corner round the back of the stairwell to get ourselves ready. And I was running my lines for my thank you speech, and it was halfway through that when there was a line about thanking everyone for what we'd achieved together that it really hit home, and I choked up a little bit. And I think my comms officer that I was preparing it with was feeling the same.
Not everybody won, but Anthony Slaughter came second in Cardiff South and Penarth, beating the Tories into third place. It's a significant moment for the local party, since it puts Greens on course to win a seat in the Welsh Parliament next time.
Well, coming second was an incredible result, beating everyone except the incumbent Labour MP. But what was really important about it was our vote shift, just under 15%. That translates into a Senate seat at the Senate election, which is of course under a proportional representation system, So it just shows that we can and will get Greens elected to the Senate in 2026.
What's more, Greens came second in all these constituencies, indicating that with sufficient effort, dozens of places could be Green targets at the next election. As the winners get used to Parliament and the responsibilities of being an MP start to sink in, how do the 4 for 24 feel about the task ahead?
We now have this incredible job ahead of us. We've, between us, got to cover a lot of work. We've got the enormous climate crisis, and that includes now actually working to reduce the impact on people's lives of the climate change that we're already seeing. This is, humanitarian work. We've also got huge amounts to do on social justice. Labour are not promising to spend money really sorting out the impacts of austerity.
I'm in a constituency where so many people have said that they never met their MP, no one had knocked on their door before, they didn't know how to contact them if they wanted to meet them. So holding surgeries from the beginning, meeting community groups, showing that I'm active and visible has been really important. And obviously alongside that, taking the opportunities in Westminster to be part of as many debates as we've been able to early on to get that Green voice heard in the room as well.
I just saw Carla from a distance as we walked to hug each other. I'm feeling it again now. Just felt this absolute immense sense of pride that this brilliant person who, I know will work with so much integrity and is exactly what our Parliament needs, will do that every single day. And I'm just so proud of the membership that got people like Carla into Parliament.
Well, I feel a huge responsibility on my shoulders, rightly so, I think. An enormous number of people, Green Party members and supporters, put a lot of time and effort into getting this record-breaking result, quadrupling our representation now with 4 Green MPs in Parliament. So we're taking on the baton from the fabulous Caroline Lucas, hoping that with that greater representation we can achieve even more than she did. But we're realistic about the fact that we are just 4 of 650 MPs. So we don't have very much hard power to deliver change, but hopefully we can find lots of opportunities to use our soft power to persuade, to push the Labour government, to acknowledge where they're heading in the right direction on some policies, but not be shy about pushing them to be bolder on areas where we think they could go further.
So I'm here on Ledbury Station, about to take the train up to Westminster for my first day at work in the Houses of Parliament. And I would just like to say the most enormous thank you to every single person in North Herefordshire who voted for me. I have said I will work my socks off for you, and I really, really will. I can't wait to get started. I'm going to be up in Westminster probably Monday to Thursday most weeks, and then Fridays and Saturdays I'll be out and about in the constituency, just as I have been in the campaign, listening to you, meeting you, hearing what your concerns are, and then taking them to Westminster. So thank you for putting your trust in me. I will do everything I can to repay that trust. I'm so grateful, and I cannot wait to get started. Thank you.
As the successful candidates return to Parliament, now MPs, some might see this as the end of a long story. For the Greens, though, it is just the opening chapter.